Good afternoon. For those who have tuned in, we are waiting for a few more persons to join us and we'll start the conversation then. So we're asking for your patience. Thank you. Yeah. A little closer. Properly in the picture. I think so. You mind if I? Yeah, got it. To be awkward for me to type, but well. Mute your phone.
No. The mic is on. Okay. of Jamaica, there have always been more of male representative, and since this body of work looks at the constitution, the governance, right, and that kind of leadership, I think
what else, what names, and so forth. But they're also more in terms of what they represent and the power structures that they represent.
that they hold, right? These paintings, they do goes back to images that we would find in the Renaissance, and when I really started to study art history and being exposed to Western art, I do commend Barbados and their move because the main thing that it does for me is this kind of social studies, right, and social concerns in our state, right? We are normally slow to self-validation, right? So, but at the same time, it also brings me back to things we were dealing with around independence and the aspirations we had going into independence, and almost 60 years post-independence, we have not really aspired to those ambitions, really. So even though this projects to be a positive thing, independence.
Right. And the political will too, because I think that
Definitely,
Jamaica was once a leader in the region in the 1960s and 70s in these issues, and it is really remarkable that it has fallen behind.
and it's quite interesting that, and even during the creation of this work, doing research for it, I find myself questioning my process sometimes, questioning what I'm working.
We're kind of asked already by Dr. Poupeye about the Paraphernalia.
Yeah.
But I wasn't clear. Would you consider these paintings to be a kind of proposal for the removal of the Paraphernalia, wigs, the badges, and so on? You mentioned the Confederate
Monument.
monuments and the difficulty in removal and how that could cause a kind of violent clash between the versus them.
Yeah.
So is it that that's going to be the removal of these? Is this a proposal for it?
Well, it is too. It's also a proposal for it, right? Because I think I've mentioned self-validation quite a few times, right? And we have also discussed the appropriation of these kind of paraphernalias also. So that is also another proposal, right? The problem is really using them in the same light, in the same way that they were being used, you know.
This is also a part of our fairness, meaning that we have other spaces that do have a societal, um, reserving this colonial kind of activities and imagery that we use.
Yeah.
Have you considered this show being a traveling show within the Caribbean?
I have given thought to that, and I think it would be a good conversation or a good show to put up in other spaces that are, kind of grappling with the same kind of reality, as it would either expand or just reignite a certain kind of conversation, and these things, they are not gone. So, as you said about the other monuments that are here in Jamaica, they may like dormant for
It's a difficult question,
it is.
and I think each country, each context sort of requires its own answers, and because there may be more than one in that regard. Any other questions? Yes, Javier.
You mentioned that you may reference Renaissance paintings
Yeah.
in terms of like poses and some of the compositions. Is that also to the question in terms of you're presenting this? And I also know that Philip Thomas also uses some of these iconographies, like the carpets and type of, certain types of
Yeah.
compositions to maybe challenge
Yeah.
particular things. So is that what you're also presenting?
To a degree, but it was more recently, right? I came to the realization, to the knowledge that the Moors were a major part of the Renaissance as well, right? The Moors were black people, and so we have been part of what the Renaissance brought to art history, to the wider Western art canon. So we have been a part of that. So it's not necessarily a purely white developed discipline that was so grand. Black people were a part of this too. So yeah, that was a good thing to come into realization of, and just the way meaning is presented and the kind of emphasis that is placed on symbolism. That for me was also a kind of pull factor to more closely the Renaissance, for instance, and I'm using saints also. So the kind of conceptualization and the kind of fuel that propelled these empires during the colonial era. I thought it was quite fitting to look back at this stage, at this era, and see what I could pull from it. How could it be a part of what is on display here?
I agree. I mean, I think reclaiming those narratives and adding the nuance to it that has been removed from it is very important. And I'm also while you were responding, Greg, I'm thinking
Yeah.
about the stained glass windows at Holy Trinity Cathedral, which are all of black saints. So I think a very important statement was made there in the context of mainstream religion, that black people are part of that story, and not just sort of people who are sort of forcibly introduced. You have to recognize that a lot would be lost in the process. I mean, just that is part of life in this country too, that all those technologies are not always very reliable or available